when there are more of you. But that won't stop us to have a conversation and a dialogue. So without wasting time, I will ask Tony to start, and I will say I have observed all protocols. I will thank Ibo later, but I will observe, I will welcome you, and I have observed all protocols. Tony, you have the floor. At the moment, you are the only one on the floor, but hey.
I have to say, in a past life, I used to be a university lecturer, and I had this alarming experience once teaching in the medical school where all the medical students who were supposed to come to my lecture didn't pitch up, not one single one of them. And I'd cycle on my bicycle from the medical school up to the main campus there, and there was an empty room. And a couple of cleaners hanging around, and I said, "Where are the students?" They said, "Oh, they've got a pathology exam tomorrow, they're studying." So I did the unforgivable for the medical students. I gave the lecture to the staff. And then I put 2 questions from that lecture in the exam, and the students afterwards came and said, "We didn't understand these questions. What was that?" And I said, "That was the lecture you didn't come to." I was not popular in the medical school after that. Thank you all for coming. It's a bit sad that we don't have representatives from ZEC and ZESM here, because the post-mortem really required some technical expertise to deconstruct the election. That certainly isn't me. As representative of the Platform of Concerned Citizens that Ibo and I call Project Sisyphus, rolling the boulder up the hill and down the hill, about 3 weeks ago here in Sappi's, we gave the position, and was put in the Independent, that we believed that it was not possible to have free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe. I would like to build on that theme, and not as a technical expert on elections, on law, but really as a citizen and a researcher who looks at things politically. I want to say that the election at the present is clearly causing considerable concern in many, many different constituencies, amongst the citizens, between the political parties, amongst the internationals. And one might say that, to some extent, this is inevitable from a political science perspective. In this room in July 2016, the Platform for Concerned Citizens came together to discuss the future of Zimbabwe and what might happen. And that was based very much on a very deep piece of analysis that Ibo had carried out in a securocrat state. And in July 2016, we posed the question for Zimbabwe: is Zimbabwe headed for a hard or a soft landing? And that was based on an analysis of where we were in 2016. The soft landing that was proposed was that what the country needed was reform of the state-military party conflation, huge reform. And the only way that that might take place was through some kind of transitional arrangement for a period of time to undertake those reforms and to lead, finally, to elections that would be uncontested, where winners would be winners and losers would accept. We proposed that could be a soft landing for Zimbabwe. We proposed the hard landing, which we saw as being the possibilities of very severe conflicts within the major ruling party. We saw that that would lead to policy paralysis and continued economic decay. And we saw the prospects of possible violence and even a coup. And I'll say that we spent a fair amount of time going around talking to all sorts of people, political parties, government, churches, civil society, labor, to suggest that this could be a platform. And I will say, in general, the idea was rebuffed. They said that's not the way we will do it in Zimbabwe. So actually, in our view, we went the hard route. What we saw was very serious succession conflicts within the ruling party and also within the opposition parties. We saw successive purges within the ruling party. We saw a deeply worsening economy. And finally, the worst of all possible predictions, the thing that people said would never ever happen in Zimbabwe, we saw a coup. And people at the time, the internationals in particular, used euphemisms, military assisted transition, etc., etc. But what became very clear to all was that this monumentous intervention in the Zimbabwean polity was to be cured by a free, fair, and credible election. That was going to be the antidote to the concerns about the military takeover of the state or the military interference of the state. So 2 weeks ago, we argued that free, fair, and credible elections on the basis of the litany that everyone was proposing were not possible. There had been no substantive reforms that dealt with the state military party confederation. There have been some minor reforms, and there's been a lot of rhetoric about the economy, but no substantial reforms that changed those relationships. And now we've been, up until the polling day, through a process that, an electoral process, that looks flawed in many, many, many aspects. And many of those flaws are observed by international observers, and both the EU and the IRI, but also to some extent by SADC. So instead of what was the real antidote of an open, transparent process, what we saw was a very opaque electoral commission and a very evasive commission in many kinds of ways. There were many things that this commission could have done on the way that did not have to be cast in law, but could be done quite easily. The issue of the ballot papers, the voters' roll, there were many, many aspects of it. The invitation to be open was lost. Now, many years ago, a very wise man I worked with in Idasa pointed out, looking at the 2005 election, that if you really want to have confidence that an election is good, there's a series of ordered steps that everybody needs to be able to see in order to say, this is a good result. Firstly, the delimitation process, the allocation of voters to constituencies, needs to be very, very, very clear and transparent. And it is in Zimbabwe right now. We've stayed with the same delimitation for some time. The issue around the voters' roll, which can cause so much dispute, is one that has to be handled very, very carefully. It needs to be open and observed and easily audited. If you look at the South African process, it's very easy to see what happens with their voters' roll and how you can interact with it. We've not seen that. We've had problems with the voters' roll all the way down the line, and at the end, parties that should have had access to the voters' roll didn't. I mean, the voters' roll should have been available at nomination. It wasn't. The ballot process. Now, producing the ballots is not a big deal, shouldn't be a big deal. The Zambians did it in an exemplary way. And everybody should be able to see the whole process, from the printing, what it looks like, how it's printed, how it's then assigned to provinces, constituencies, wards, so you know how many extra ballot papers have been printed, so that you know what the overflow is likely to be. That's all creates confidence. I would suggest that was deeply missing. And above all, the whole process of results needs to be as clear and transparent, and the counting observed at every single level. Everybody needs to be in the room at each particular process. And I don't think that operated here, and created huge confusion and led to at least one very serious incident. So what you could say, I